Hello and welcome. I'm thrilled to be joined today by Jenna Marcus, author of Breathe Deep and Swim. Along with being an author, she is also an avid reader, a voracious coffee drinker, a vegan, and an animal rights supporter. My name is Cameron. I'm part of the editorial staff here at Booktrib, the leading source for book news and reviews. I am so excited to be here with Jenna Marcus to discuss her book, which was released earlier this year and has been described by Kirkus as a moving portrait of brotherly love. Jenna, it's so good to talk to you today. How are you?
I'm doing well. Thank you, Cameron. It's great to talk to you as well.
It's great to have you here. To start us off, I wanted to say, when it came to writing Breathe Deep and Swim, what were you hoping to achieve with this story?
Thank you for that question. I wasn't hoping to achieve anything specific, but what I really wanted to come through was the brothers' relationship, because it is the foundation of the story and it's what really drives the plot. It's very character driven. A lot of writers write in that way. So I would create situations and I would think, what would Wolfgang and what would Van Gogh do? So I really hope that came across, that these brothers are very loyal to and protective of one another, and that they will literally do anything for one another. And they are absolutely going through trying times. At the beginning of the novel, we find out that their father has sadly passed away from COVID, and they fear being a part of the foster care system. And by being a part of that system, they fear being separated. So they go on this whirlwind journey to find their mom, who abandoned them over 10 years ago, just so that they could stay together. So, that bond and that trust in one another, and just, asking yourself, like, what would I do to be with someone who I truly love and care about, is really what I wanted to achieve. And I hope that came across in the novel.
Well, to me, being someone who read the book, it definitely did. To me, the bond between those two brothers and characters was wonderful. I was actually wondering, they do have such a close bond. How did you go about building that relationship between these two fictional characters that felt so real?
So, I really love reading and writing about characters that have a very close bond and this trust. So I was inspired by authors who did that. And I've just written short stories, and I actually wrote a novel before this one, My Unusual Talent, where I created a similar bond between siblings. Unfortunately, I myself don't have a sibling, so some of it was imagination, but I have bonds with friends and family members, such as my dad, who the book was dedicated to. He's one of my strongest supporters, and he actually heard the book as it was being written. I would read him chapters, and he is the best father in the land. I'll go to bat on that one. But I really appreciated his unwavering support, and that inspired me, because I have someone like that in my life. I tried to hone that in the relationship with these brothers.
That is so special, and you can definitely feel it in the story. Because you were saying you were inspired by, if not a sibling, then like a friend or a family figure. And it's true, because Wolfgang and Van Gogh aren't just brothers, they're also best friends. So that kind of bond with someone can surpass all of those boxes. That's wonderful. So your author's bio mentions that you actually have worked with teens in real life before. You work in education. You have experience with grades 7 through 12 specifically, which is the age range of our main characters. So that was so special when I got to read that. How do you think this experience with teens impacts your writing of these two?
It impacts it in so many ways. I wrote it for teens. It's a coming of age story. I hope that, a lot of the students I've worked with and the students I continue to work with don't have this particular experience, but I've seen them take care of one another. I've worked with students in public school and international boarding, private school, and now in a charter school. And taking the international boarding school, they create adoptive close relationships where they have to rely on one another for so much in their life because they're so away from their families. And in the current school where I'm working, I see the students just take care of one another. Siblings just, hold each other's hands and walk each other to school, or being in Zoom and being remote. I see the siblings in the background and how they respond to one another. I even had a student talk about how she missed her brother who was going away. And to see those bonds and whether, them communicated verbally or to just like see them interact with one another, that was so inspirational because, I see the trust and the loyalty that they have, and it being coming of age, it's, in some ways it's very rough, because you come to a realization about yourself and the world around you. And I've seen that in the teens that I've worked with. And that's what I try to encapsulate in these brothers, especially Wolfgang, who has to really go out of his character and stand up for himself, which is so out of character for him. It's very difficult. And that's definitely trying, but that's a part of growing up.
Absolutely. No, it really is. It fits perfectly with that age range because it is such a trying time for kids trying to figure out who they are and how to fit into the world. And it really shined in your writing. You could tell that you, the author, had experience with this age range, and they really did feel like these actual real life teens. It was very realistic.
Thank you.
It was so realistic, actually, that I know you mentioned that some readers actually were triggered or were very having a strong reaction to one of Van Gogh's decisions that he made in the book. Could you elaborate on that?
Absolutely. I'll try not to give too much away.
Yeah, absolutely.
So just to understand some of Van Gogh's choices you have to understand Van Gogh. He's very loyal to his brother, but similar to his father, who he has a combative relationship with, which is revealed through flashbacks when the father was alive. So even though they have a combative relationship, in ways they are similar, and sometimes that they have tunnel vision, and that they may be in self-denial, and they're quite stubborn. And this is sort of encapsulated through the symbolism of the shared lily pad green eyes. I did that purposely in order to indicate that they're sort of character foils in a way. So Van Gogh he's in this very desperate situation where he just wants to stay with his younger brother, who he's protected his entire life. And he made a questionable choice, a few questionable choices, but he made a questionable choice when he got on the train. But Van Gogh is not out to save the world. We want to believe that our protagonists are purely stoic and that they're going to do what is best for humanity as a whole. That's not exactly Van Gogh's character. Not that he's trying to take over the world. He doesn't become a villain. But in the face of trauma, sometimes we make desperate decisions that unfortunately may be self-serving. They may not be what's best for the community. And Van Gogh does reflect on this later, and he does admit he was wrong, which he will do. He's not entirely stubborn to a fault where he won't admit that he's wrong when he is wrong. But, he did do something that I've seen people do in real life. The situations that played out on the train, I've actually observed. And, desperate times sometimes do call for desperate measures, and that's what Van Gogh went with. So this is not out of character. And I understand it being triggering, especially, it taking place during the pandemic and reflecting on, if that happened to you. Unfortunately, as I mentioned, I've seen these situations play out as I described, and that's the reality. And sometimes reality is not as, lovely and, as you would see it through rose-colored glasses. So I did paint a realistic picture of a 16-year-old kid who just desperately wants to stay with his brother. And sometimes it doesn't mean always making the best choice.
Absolutely. No, it was very realistic. What you mentioned about it being a trauma response, these boys really are going through a traumatic experience. and you're right, that like Van Gogh is 16 years old. We can't expect him to have the foresight in this very dangerous situation. And so it was so interesting to read as a reader, because if I were to be witnessing this, I would probably be angry at Van Gogh or frustrated. But when you're in his and Wolfgang's perspective, you're rooting for them. They're the protagonist. You can see the other side, and it is very enlightening to be able to see that. So that was I understand why it elicited such a strong reaction from readers, but it was a strong reaction because it's very realistic and it makes you think about a lot of things.
Absolutely.
So it was really a great scene.
Thank you.
Of course. When it comes to your writing process, I'm so curious. How do you go about planning your books? Do you plan everything out ahead of time, or do you free write?
It's interesting. I do a bit of both. So speaking about my students, one of the first things I do is sort of outline it. And I actually do it in this notebook that I have here. One of my former students gave this to me as a gift after he graduated, not the year that he graduated, but he visited the campus and he gave this to me, and he left this lovely message in the beginning of the notebook. He is a brilliant, brilliant writer. I had him in IB literature, and it just meant so much to me. Anything that my students do or give to me, or, it always means so much to me because they're a part of my narrative, and hopefully what I've taught them and how I've helped them is a part of their narrative. So I actually outline a lot of the book in there. Especially the characters. As I mentioned, it's very character driven. And I asked myself, okay, like given this situation, what would this character do and what this character do? So I draft like a character outline, all the characteristics, right down to like their birthday and what they may be doing in the future, some details that aren't even in the book, but I need to know. Yeah, that I need to know as a writer, like, okay, if this is their experience or this is who they are, like how would they react, like given this plot or given this challenge or obstacle. And I'll also outline the plot and I'll write it all down, and then I'll just write and it'll change in the moment. So I kind of do a bit of both. I outline it, especially the characters, and I go in and I'm like, this is my plan. And then I'm rating it. And then I'm like, well, there went my plan. Just like with the ending, I wrote out the ending and I thought about it and I conceived it in like 10 different ways. Oh, wow. And none of those made it to the page. it just happened in the moment. And I'm like, yep, that's how it ends. That's exactly where I wanted it to be. I planned it, but the plan went out the window. So I sort of did a bit of both. And that process sort of works. I want to know where I'm going, but in the moment I'm like, well, that's not where it's going. So I'm just going to let the writing take me where it takes me.
That is so interesting that you combine the two. And it sounds like quite the journey, but it clearly is working for you. I'm so surprised about the ending, because reading it, I was like, that is such a great place for it to end. I don't know, it just fell together very, well and fit within the story. So it's like, I'm wondering about all these alternate endings now, like in a picture, like, but no, that's great. What an awesome experience, and what a great gift from your former student. That's a beautiful notebook, and it clearly has a lot of emotional value as well, being from one of your former students.
Absolutely.
When it comes to inspiration, I was wondering, Wolfgang, especially in the story, has a list of his favorite books and authors. I was wondering if there are any authors or books that helped to inspire you.
Yeah, some of the authors on that list are authors that inspire me. As you mentioned, I'm such an avid reader. Yes, I describe myself as a bookworm, which a lot of readers.
We can see the bookshelf behind you, so definitely.
You're not the only one, believe it or not. I have a bunch throughout my apartment. But yeah, so just to name a few, Nic Stone, who wrote Dear Martin and Dear Justice, just the way she creates these prevalent themes that are so timely, and she paints these characters that are just so lifelike. I know, like when I was reading Dear Martin, literally at one point I yelled no to a book. So like, wow, she like, she really created that catharsis for me in the moment. S.E. Hinton, very similar to her. And I guess I've sort of adopted this. She would write out her characters in full, knowing them completely, especially with the outsiders. She was able to tell people what happened to like Soda Pop and Pony Boy, in their adult years. Some people were shocked by what happened to Soda Pop, but especially with her characters, like the bond that the brothers had and the bond that the greasers had, I was just very, very inspired by that. And how she just brings her characters to life in all of her writing, particularly her coming of age novels, like The Outsiders.
Yes.
Absolutely. And then Ray Bradbury, he doesn't create these types of characters, but just his stories are just so vivid. And I think that's why, like in the past, I taught Fahrenheit 451 for 9 years. Like the writing.
Wow.
Yeah.
So you know that book.
I know it. I know it really well. But just the way he would vividly paint these pictures, and again, like his prevalent themes about, the adverse effects of television and censorship and the importance of, vital education, and then just the figurative language usage that he used throughout. I'm just so inspired by that. And even though he wrote mostly fantasy and horror fiction, a little bit of science fiction, which this isn't, he would just paint such a vivid picture of the characters and the situation. And in some ways, like his writing is character driven as well, whether it be in the Martian Chronicles or the Illustrated Man, or I'm just name dropping here, or Fahrenheit 451. Or Amy Tan, and how, in the Joy Luck Club, she created this relationship between the mothers and daughters of different generations. So those are only a few. Like I could name more, I could keep going. But them in particular, just because their writing is so memorable, it creates such an emotional reaction. And well beyond the literature, you're still thinking about the stories, you're still thinking about the themes, you're still thinking about the characters. I think that writers who do that are important, and they're a part of this wider conversation that we're consistently having with literature, with narratives in general, with stories, whether they be fiction, nonfiction. Any writer who does that is really inspirational, and I just hope that my book could be a part of that conversation.
That is so, oh my gosh, I'm getting what you're saying. I'm so sorry. It's like, even though those books aren't necessarily within the YA genre that you were talking about, when I think of The Outsiders by S.E. Hinton, when I think of Fahrenheit 451, what you're saying about these character-driven stories is so true. I'm like I'm trying to go back to high school English class, at least longer ago than I'd like to admit, but and I'm picturing the story, even though it is obviously a dystopian novel, it's very far away from the story of these two brothers. I can definitely see the comparison in the characters themselves and the struggles that they are going through. Although they're very different, it's still a very human kind of struggle.
Absolutely.
So it's great to hear your inspirations and where you get this kind of drive for these character-driven works. I also wanted to ask, and we have a question from our audience, I believe. This book, it has the title Breathe Deep and Swim, which is something that Wolfgang says throughout the novel, actually. I was wondering if I could ask what Breathe Deep and Swim means to you, and then why you decided to include it in your book, or as the title of your book.
What's interesting is I had a list in this notebook. I actually generated a list of all the titles. Originally, it was just untitled. I'm just like, I obviously have to come up with a title. It can't be untitled. And I was thinking, as I was writing, what summarizes what's happening to these brothers, what they're going through, like what is the title? Which is a question every author has to ask because it needs a title. And I wrote down, some ideas. I wasn't satisfied with it, and it just came to me. And I'm a huge fan of metaphors. Anyone who you meet who knows me really well will say like, oh yeah, Jenna loves her metaphors. So it is a metaphor. It's something that originally Wolfgang's mother said to him when he was very young, and it's the first and only memory he has of her. And he has this memory of her saying, breathe deep and swim, but there's no water around. There's no signs that they were going to go swimming. There's no beach. So he doesn't really understand what it means. So he has to apply meaning to it. And I won't reveal whether or not he gets that confirmation as to whether or not his interpretation is right. But essentially what it means to me and what it means to Wolfgang is, you know, you're going to face these challenges. They face the challenge of after their father dies and having to find their mom. And then along the way, they face more obstacles and challenges. But in life, especially during these times, we're definitely going to face challenges, some great, some small. But through life, we're going to have these obstacles. And sometimes we just need to take a deep breath to prepare for the moment. And then we just need to dive in. And that's what they have to do. They don't want to leave their house and go on this trip to find their mom. They do it because of the circumstance that they find themselves in and wanting to stay together. And I know I've done that throughout my life. Sometimes you find yourself in a situation and you're just like, all right, here I am. This is what I need to do. So you know what, I have to do it. And I'm going to try the best I can, because you're not going to be the perfect swimmer. when you swim, you're gonna try. Hopefully you know how to swim, but you know, if you don't, you're gonna learn.
Oh yeah.
You're gonna learn that moment. But yeah, that's what it means to me. It's definitely a life lesson. It's hard. It's hard, especially when you don't feel prepared. But you know, you can only do the best that you can, and sometimes you just have to keep trying until you succeed.
Mm-hmm. That's very accurate, and it's great advice, and it's definitely advice that applies to Wolfgang and Van Gogh. That just breathe deep and swim. Just keep going. So yeah, it's wonderful that it's in the book for them to find that little bit of information from their mom. This story is especially timely right now, given that COVID-19 is such a major plot point. It seems like, from what I'm hearing from authors these days, they're kind of in two camps. Some are deciding not to conclude COVID-19 at all, and then some are choosing intentionally to talk about COVID-19. What inspired you to be part of the latter?
Yeah, I think this is what's happening is something that connects us as a global community, and there are very few events that actually create that tapestry and that conversation. And there's been a lot of trauma, and it continues. I've known people that have been very, very directly affected by COVID-19. I don't think that there's anyone. We're all living through it. So speaking of the large narrative of literature, I think it is a part of our narrative. It's a part of our journey, for better or for worse. I knew that I wanted the story to take place now at this time. It's not as if I keep like mentioning it, like every single time they just mention COVID-19, but it is a part of our existence. I respect those who don't mention it. That's their journey and that's their choice. I thought that it needed to be mentioned because it is a part of our reality. And a lot of times fiction reflects reality, especially when it's realistic fiction. And, I've also, I've worked with teens, and they experience this, and they're growing up, they're in their formative years, and they're growing up in a time where they're seeing trauma around them, and they're directly affected. They see their friends directly affected. And I just couldn't ignore it because it is a part of our story. And I think in a way it was cathartic to write about it, or to at least have it as the backdrop. And I hope it's also cathartic for those that read it.
I would argue it is, because it is an important conversation to be having right now. And I think it's great that you aimed this book specifically at the age range of those teens who are going through these formative years during a very difficult time to be growing up and to be trying to establish themselves in the world when the world is struggling. So we're going to be wrapping up in a couple minutes here. But in the meantime, I did want to ask, what are you hoping that people take away from your book, Breathe Deep and Swim?
Well, I hope that they enjoy it first and foremost. But we've been talking a lot about the brothers, Wolfgang and Van Gogh. I really hope that that bond comes across. As I mentioned before, that's what really drives the plot. I thought like I could have created any situation, but they would have acted differently and the situation would have turned out differently because these characters were a part of it. So I hope that their relationship is impactful and that people are inspired by that relationship. I've told a bunch of people, even after writing it, like I miss the characters and they look at me like I'm crazy. But they, even though they are fictional, I tried to bring them to life as much as possible. So I hope that, my readers have people in their lives that, they love that much and that they're loyal to. I'm very fortunate that I have people in my life, like my friends, colleagues, and especially my parents that I care about. And I just hope that, everyone does have someone like that in their life that they care about as well.
That's really beautiful. That's a great message. And it's a sort of, this book has messages to it that I think we could all use right now, that sort of sense of family and community and togetherness during trying times is very relatable and very appropriate right now. So I have one last question, which is, what's next for you?
Yeah, I won't reveal too much. I'm always, as you can see, my bookcase is growing. I have books like on top of books. So always reading. I am writing something right now. I won't reveal too much about it, but it is still in the young adult coming of age vein. I really enjoy writing within that genre and for that audience. I think that I'll always write because I just enjoy it so much. I enjoy creating these worlds and especially creating these characters. And of course, I will outline it in my little notebook because I just love it so much. And then I'll outline it and they'll turn out totally different, which is totally fine because that's my process. So yeah, I'll keep reading and writing. It's a part of who I am. And I just hope what I put on to the world people enjoy.
That's awesome. Well, we're looking forward to it. I know I certainly am. That's amazing. Well, Jenna Marcus, thank you so much. It was so wonderful to have this talk. And thank you all for joining us today. Breathe Deep and Swim is available for purchase now. And thank you for this wonderful discussion.
Thank you.